Where do I even start with 1% Lifesteal by Blaise? Wait, that's a relatively normal name for a Royal Road author. That can't be right. Did I write down the wrong name? Shouldn't it be Slagwaggler or something like that? Anyway, let's not get sidetracked. If I wasn't planning to review 1% Lifesteal Book 1, and if I hadn't already parted with an Audible credit, I might have DNF'd this one early, possibly in the opening pages. It's a grind. The protagonist's grinding, we're grinding, everyone's just grinding, and it feels like the story's grinding to nowhere until it does go somewhere, and you start to think maybe it was worth the grind.
No fluff writing advice. Cut the fluff!
Honestly, and I mean this for real, one thing that kept me reading onward was I saw the cover for book 3, Freddy with that absolute riot shield of a sword, and looking a little more confident than he is in book 1, and it looks like the series gets good, if judging a book by its cover is anything to go by. Anyway, let's discuss why 1% Lifesteal with such a sweet title was such a tough read, before we dive into all the good bits that make me want to continue the series. Yes, I don't normally do this, but today I'm starting with the bad. You know, take your medicine, then you can have a little treat in the form of praise. Look, we might as well start at the beginning. Could that opening be any duller? And I know that's partially the point, to highlight our protagonist Freddie Stern's mediocre existence, but did we need to highlight every part of it? The story literally starts with, he woke up and did some stuff, which is generally one of the most uncompelling ways to start a story. If you're going to show someone's morning routine, it better be a goddamn story-defining sequence of events. In the case of 1% Lifesteal, it's not story defining, but as a counterpoint, it does help set the scene for everything that comes next. So I could have forgiven it if it were the only seemingly endless stretch of monotony in my way, which it wasn't, not at all. Alright, let's push through the pain. So one other reason the start of 1% Lifesteal might be a tough read is it's too real. It's like dystopian urban progression fantasy that, aside from the magic, feels too much like modern life. Once I realised the author was providing unsolicited social commentary on all the real life issues many of us are trying to ignore by reading fantasy in the first place, I'm talking widespread poverty, a lack of journalistic integrity, and the futility of living a working class existence, I wondered why I wasn't just reading the news. We literally see Freddy working what mirrors a standard real life retail job. But to be fair, some wild stuff happens fairly quickly, and the story gets delightfully confusing. But after the initial excitement, even after Freddy gets his powers, the monotony returns. You know, those groceries won't buy themselves, those bloated bureaucratic hurdles won't overcome themselves, and that retail job won't do itself. It's like a bad reality TV show that's following around your typical impoverished retail worker who, granted, does have some superpowers, as unimpressive as they are. Like I said, it's too real. For the record, the social commentary is on point and subtle enough that it doesn't overshadow the story. I just didn't expect to be wading through so much mundaneness. Even as Freddy's adjusting to his new situation, he's just hanging out in his apartment, pottering about, figuring things out. We get to watch him sitting around collecting essences for a while, an important part of the progression system, to be fair, but it's the equivalent of watching someone work out. Not long after I had that thought, we literally have to watch Freddy work out. It's just a regular guy going about his day. Why are we here? Let's talk about Freddy himself. Now, I've said some critical things about Jason Asano from He Who Fights with Monsters. Some of them might be true, but at least he has personality. Freddie Stern, on the other hand, has the personality of a cabbage. In the beginning, at least. I'll get to his character development when I dish out some praise, some well-earned praise. Personality aside, at the start of the story, Freddy's a very reactive protagonist. He's just getting shuffled around by the plot. He finally gets what he's always wanted all his life, and he doesn't know what to do next. Like, what was the plan? I know his new situation is sprung on him. He's a bit overwhelmed by it all, but he's so uninspiring and uninteresting for most of the book, which, knowing where it goes, may have been intentional. The payoffs do come, they're just a long way off in the distance. Part of the problem with Freddy being so inactive is the plot has very little momentum, which means plot reliant Freddy also lacks momentum. He's just sort of hanging about, training, waiting for stuff to happen, while I'm sitting there reading, waiting for stuff to happen. Even when wild stuff does go down, afterwards, it's usually just back to training and routine. You know, the bread and butter of a compelling story. If the bread was stale and the butter were rancid and someone defecated on everything for good measure, all right, too far. That's enough criticism. Believe it or not, I do have some rather nice things to say about 1% Lifesteal. Firstly, while it's unique, Freddy's power 1% lifesteal, which converts 1% of damage dealt into healing, is about as exciting as Freddy himself. I swear the praise is coming, just bear with me. My point is, I respect the bold move of giving a protagonist such an uninspiring power. It doesn't help cut through the dullness of the early plot at all, but it does open up a world of potential. It drew me in and had me wondering, where are we going with this? Somewhere, hopefully. And the magic system itself, with vestiges, remnants, essences, affinities, and all that other stuff, is super creative. Yeah, while the gathering aspect of progressing is as exciting as staring at a pile of bricks, the magic system itself is interesting. I also appreciate how we're drip fed info, and yeah, there are some dressed up info dumps in the form of dialogue, but they kind of work because Freddy himself is ignorant, and people do have to explain to him what many in his world consider common knowledge. Freddy's uncertainty about his own world adds a layer of uncertainty for us, the readers, and not having world building facts rammed up your nose holes, what are they, nostrils, is refreshing. Now it's time to dish out some high praise. For me, the winning element of 1% Lifesteal, aside from Bloodshed, probably the most two-dimensional character in the book, but also one of the most interesting. Anyway, the winning element for me is Freddy's character development. Come to think of it, most of the characters do feel authentic, and while the slow pacing forces the plot to crawl forward on its hands and knees, licking the dirt, it also allows for gradual, realistic, and eventually meaningful character development for Freddy. He's constantly evolving, often in slow and subtle ways, and you see him go from fairly rigid in his approach to life to becoming highly adaptable. It's slow burn character development for the most part, but then he faces a seriously torturous challenge, and he is noticeably and realistically changed after that situation. I also wonder, did his time in retail prepare him for that difficult situation? As someone who has worked in retail and did so for many years, yeah, probably. Freddy faces real trauma, and even after the first incident at the start of the book, you see him change as a result. Suddenly, he's focused on defending himself, which puts him on a whole new path. To me, he's a realistic character, maybe one of the most realistic I've seen in lit RPG so far, maybe too real, and his development is showcased in his evolving actions, reactions, and overall mindset. As dull as he can be, especially in the beginning, Freddy feels real. I mean, as real as a fictional page person can. Fair warning, 1% Lifesteal is a slow burn. You get the sense it's going somewhere, and it is, oh, it definitely is, but it does take the scenic route. There is a big finish, yes, the satisfying climax does come, and unlike some lit RPG book ones, there is a complete story and character arc. But it's a tough one for me to recommend because there is a lot of what seems like busy work fueling that slow burn character development. I feel like I just need to dive into book two soon. Book one feels like a slow setup to something bigger, and I'm hoping the pace picks up in the next book while still maintaining that steady and realistic character development. Or am I asking too much? Yeah, maybe. All right, let's end on a fun note. So, like many republished web novels, 1% Lifesteal does have some wonky writing. Now, this may have been intentional, sometimes we do make unconventional style choices, but describing someone as ravenously famished is essentially saying the same thing twice. It made me laugh. It's like saying, I'm tiredly exhausted, or I'm scarily afraid, or this review is completely finished. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy this video, hit subscribe anyway, and hate watch my content. That's always fun.